guys, it's Danielle with DMC Crochet. Welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to go through how to make a granny square. So before I get started with this, I would just like to ask if you would please subscribe to my channel. That would be awesome. Also, if you like this video, please be sure to like it and share it. And then if you don't, just let me know why. And then also, just to let you know, you can get a hold of me here on YouTube. You can also email me at dmadecrochet@gmail.com. And then I'm also on Instagram at dmadecrochet. All right, so granny squares. So I know based on reading a lot of articles that granny squares crochet used to just kind of be known for granny squares, and they were used a lot for Afghans and, you know, blankets and things like that. And for a while it was kind of assumed that crochet equals blankets and then that's it, and that granny squares were kind of out of style. And apparently they're making a huge comeback now. I've seen them made into shirts and ponchos and dresses and decor items like pillows and coasters. I have a set of coasters that I made downstairs in our kitchen they're made of granny squares. And I've seen, you know, bags and placemats and tablecloths. So I wanted to go ahead and just kind of show you how to do a granny square, kind of talk you through that. I did want to say though that there are several ways to start one. This is just my personal favorite way to start it. I'm just adjusting the iPad right now just to get a little bit more comfortable. Okay, so I just have some worsted weight yarn, and again, you know, your yarn and hook, just make sure that they go together. Make sure that your hook supports your yarn and vice versa, meaning like that the sizes go together. I am using right now an H hook, and I'm going to start with a slip knot. If you don't know how to make a slip knot, I do have videos on how to get started with all this stuff, so feel free to check out the rest of the videos on my channel. So I'm going to leave a pretty long tail, at least 3 inches. So what I'm going to do with the slip knot is I'm going to take my short end of the yarn, wrap around my index and middle finger, wrap it again, cross over, and then I actually figured out that if I pull the yarn through with my fingers, it actually goes faster. So I'm just going to pull the yarn that's closer to my hand under the yarn that's closer to my nail on my middle finger, drop all my fingers out, tighten a little bit, then I'm going to stick my hook into the little hole, the little loop that was made, and then I'm just going to pull tight around the neck of my hook. Okay, so a granny square is just chain stitches and double crochets. There are ways to, like, if you're going to change colors, you would also use a slip stitch, but I'm not changing colors with this one. I'm just going to do it all one color. I will say that a lot of the ones I've seen, they do change colors. So the first round would be one color, second round would be 2 colors, or, you know, the second color, etc. This is just to show you, so get as creative as you want with it. So what I'm going to start with is a chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now that the chain 3 is done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to double crochet 2 times into the first chain closest to that slip knot. So this chain 3 does count as a double crochet, and so I want to have a cluster of 3. So basically what a granny square is you're going around in cluster sets of 3 double crochets and 2 chain spaces. That's as long as you know how to do the double crochet and the chain stitch, you're going to be all set to do a granny square. You, like I said, if you're going to change colors, you'll need to do a slip stitch, but as long as you know those 3 things, you're all set. So here I go. I'm going to do my first double crochet into that chain closest to the slip knot. Okay, and then 1 more. I'm sorry if you hear some hammering. My husband is putting up some pictures on our living room wall, which is right below where my craft room is. All right, so I have these 3 double crochets done. So that chain 3, even though we crocheted into that very first chain, that chain 3 still counts as a double crochet, and then I have 2 double crochets. So now I'm going to chain 2. 1, 2. Okay, now that I've chained 2, I'm going to go back So I'm going to double crochet a set of 3 double crochets into that same chain that we started with. So the chain closest to your slip knot, so you're going to crochet right up against that slip knot. I'm going to do 3 more double crochets. One, two, and 3. Okay, now I will say, and this will make more sense once we get more rounds onto our granny square, but we've just made a corner. Okay, so now what do you think is going to come next? If you guessed a chain 2, you are correct. 1, 2, okay, and then another cluster of 3 double crochets into that very same chain that we went into at the beginning. Okay, so and you'll feel that that chain is getting looser the more stitches that you're putting into it. It's kind of stretching, and that's a good thing. Now you don't want it to stretch to where there's like a huge hole, but you want it to stretch to accommodate your stitches. So here I go. Oops. Whoops.
Viewfinder. Focus unlock. Image.
All right, with my 3rd double crochet after I sent the iPad spinning. Sorry about that. All right, so now what we have is 1 cluster of 3, counting that chain up that we did, then a chain 2 space, then another cluster of 3, then a chain 2 space, then another cluster of 3, and you guessed it, we are going to do another chain 2. 1, 2. And to finish up this first round, we are going to put 3 more double crochets into that same chain we've been stitching into this whole time. Now you can start a granny square with a magic circle. You can also start it with just a chain 4 and then slip stitch that together and then do these clusters into the circle. But I find that this method, and again guys, I don't know everything, so just, you know, take it for just my opinion, but the center circle tends to be really tight on this because you are just crocheting into a chain, and I like that. I like for the center circle in my granny squares, especially if I'm making a coaster or a placemat, I want that center circle to be tiny. Okay, so I just finished my cluster, my last cluster, so you should have 4, at this point you should have 4 clusters of 3 double crochets and then 3 chain 2 spaces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chain these last 2, 1, 2, and then I'm going to slip stitch into, so I guess you don't have to slip stitch, or you do slip stitch even if you're not changing color, my bad. So I'm going to slip stitch into this very first, into the top chain of that first chain 3. Okay, so I'm going in there and I'm slip stitching. All right, now so I'm taking my hook out of my little baby square here. So you will have a square, and in your square you're going to have the 4 corners should be your chain 2 spaces. So in the corners you'll have a chain 2 space, and then in between those you will have the 3 double crochet clusters. These are also excuse me, these are also called granny clusters. So now you want to chain 3, because remember your chain 3 is going to count as a double crochet, and then you want to turn your work like a book. Okay, now what you're going to do is into this corner space, because since you turned your work like a book, you're going to have a corner space directly next to that chain 3 you just made. You're going to double crochet twice, because that chain 3 again, it counts as a stitch. So here's my first double, my second double. Okay, so now I have that cluster of 3 again. Sorry, I need to get more yarn. All right, so then you're going to chain 2. 1, 2. So now what you're going to do is into that same corner space that you just did that granny cluster and then the 2 chains, you're going to do another granny cluster, okay? So you're making your first corner. 1 double crochet, 2 double crochets, 3 double crochets. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to chain 2, 1, 2. And so where you're at right now is once you've chained 2, so if you feel your work, you just made a corner, and then so you should be at this this next, on the row below or on the round below, you should be at the next granny cluster. You're going to skip over that, so you're not going to crochet anything into the granny cluster. You're just going to do a granny cluster in the next chain 2 space. So in the next corner on that first round, you're going to do a granny cluster. So there's 1 double, 2 doubles, 3 doubles. Yikes, he has a drill out now. Maybe he's building a fort. All right, so now that you've got that granny cluster done, you're going to chain 2 because now you're making the corner on this round, okay? And then you're going to, into that same corner space, you're going to do another granny cluster. So there's 1 double. Oops, come on. 2 doubles, 3 doubles. Okay, so here again, we should be at our next, on the round below, we should be at our next granny cluster. Not going to do anything in there. What you're going to do is chain 2 and then go to the next corner, and you're going to do another granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster. Okay. Okay, so I just finished 1 granny cluster. I'm going to chain 2, and in the same corner space, I'm going to do another granny cluster. There's 1 double, 2 doubles, 3 doubles. Oops. Okay, now here again, we're on our last, so we are coming up to that last granny cluster from the round below. So we're going to chain 2, again, not working anything into that granny cluster. All right, and then we're going to go to the next corner and do granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster. Okay, so 1 double, 2 doubles, 3 doubles, chain 2, 1, 2, and then in this next, in that same corner space from the round below, you're going to do another granny cluster. 1 double, 2 doubles, 3 doubles. Yikes, this yarn over failed. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now what you have on this second round, you're gonna have, what you're gonna feel is if you put your hook down and you lay your work flat onto your surface or onto your lap or whatever, or even onto the palm of your hand, what you're gonna have is you're going to feel, if you're feeling it from the bottom left corner, you're gonna have a corner. So that's going to be that granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster. And then next to that, you're going to have a little hole. And that's going to be the chain 2 that lives right above that granny cluster from round 1. Okay, and then next to that, you're going to have another corner. So cluster, chain 2, cluster. If you turn your work to the side, meaning like if you do a 45 degree angle? 90 degree. If you turn it 90 degrees, I don't know math, y'all. You're going to feel the same thing. So you're going to feel that corner. So it's the granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster. Then you're going to have a space. So that's that chain 2 space that we did over the granny cluster from the first round, and then next to that you're going to feel another corner. And what happens is you can go as big as you want with these granny squares. You can make them, one of my first big Afghans was just a continuous granny square. So you can do this as often, or not as often, but as much as you want. You can make it huge, or you can do, I think the traditional granny square, if I'm not mistaken, is 5 rounds. But it's just it's a kind of one of those things where you could listen to a book or watch TV or listen in class and just kind of go, and they're very versatile, and like I said, you can turn them into some really cute things. So now what we need to do to close up this round, and yes, it's called a round even though this is a square, you're going to chain 2, 1, 2, and then you're going to slip stitch this to that chain, the very top chain of that chain 3 we did at the beginning of this round. Okay, so let's get in there.
8:45 p.m. One notification.
All right, so now we have the square all closed up, and you're gonna feel where it goes corner, chain 2 space, corner, corner, chain 2 space, corner, corner, chain 2 space, corner, etc. Now what we're gonna do, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, turn our work like a book, and so that chain 3 should be right above the chain 2, a chain 2 space, so not above a corner, but above a chain 2 space. So what we're going to do is we're going to double crochet into that chain 2 space 2 times, because again, this chain 3 counts as a double. Okay, so here we just made a granny cluster into that chain 2 space. Now you guessed it, we're going to chain 2, 1, 2, and now we're going into the corner, and in the corner we're going to do a granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster, 1, 2, 3, chain 2, and then you want to do another granny cluster, so that's 1 double, 2 doubles, 3. All right, so we're going to do, so we did that chain 2, and then we're going into this next chain 2 space from the row below, and we're going to do another granny cluster. So that's 1 double, 2 double, 3 double, chain 2, and then you're back in a corner, and that's where you're going to do your corner, right? So it's the granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster. All right, so we're getting into this chain 2, 1, 2, we are finishing that first double crochet. Excuse me. I always bring water up here with me before I film, and the one day that I don't bring water, I'm like coughing. Ugh. Sorry about that. Okay, so we've just done another corner. So we're halfway done with this round, with this third round, okay? So what you're gonna feel if you put your work flat on the table or on your lap or whatever, you're going to feel from that first chain 3 that we did, you're going to feel granny cluster, chain 2 space, and then a corner. So then the next you're going to feel chain 2 space, granny cluster, chain 2 space, corner. So if you notice, on the first row, we didn't have any chain, on the first round, I'm sorry, we didn't have any chain 2 spaces between the corners. It was just corner, 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 corner. On the next row, we have a chain 2 space between each corner. So it's corner, chain space, corner, chain space, corner, chain space, corner, chain space. Now on this third row, we've got 2 chain spaces. So it should go corner, chain space, corner. Now on the next row, it's going to go corner, chain space, corner. So you're every row you're increasing by 1 chain space on each side of your square. So we're going to keep going. And like I said, you can go as big as you want. You can change colors every row if you want. You don't have to change colors. You can do a variegated yarn. You can do cotton yarn. You can do chunky yarn. It's all up to you. That's the cool thing about granny squares. Girl. So you can do all kinds of things with these. Like I said, I did coasters. And actually, I'm going to do a tutorial for those coasters here coming up soon. So that way you guys can kind of see the practicality of the granny square. And they're cute and they're timeless. So it's something that you can really get into. I've seen them made into bookmarks where you would use a really like a thread, almost like a super fine yarn, and you would just make a granny square and then put tassels on it. It's really cute. So just kind of let your imagination go once you have the basics. All right, so I'm getting into my corner again. Chain 2, 1, 2, then my granny cluster. There's 1 double, 2 doubles, 3 doubles. Now chain 2, 1, 2, going into the chain 2 space and doing a granny cluster. And then I will say too, I'm going to fasten this one off early just so that you guys can see how to do it, but it's really easy. Just make sure that you have finished the round completely before you fasten off. Otherwise your project will be short one side, but otherwise it's fastening off like you would with any other project. So I'm back at the corner. I'm at my last corner. Okay, so I'm doing my cluster. Then my chain 2. And my last cluster. Excuse me. Okay, I'm about to do the last double crochet for this cluster. Okay, and then always remember too, like don't forget to do your chain 2 when you are finishing a round. I know it's easy to just kind of get into the groove of it and slip stitch this together, but then what'll happen is you'll be missing a chain 2 space. So always remember to do your chain 2. Okay, so I just did that, and now I'm going to slip stitch into the first chain that we started in, or the top chain of that chain 3. Oh, you guys, Schultz is dreaming. Oh, my buddy. Okay, he's done. I think because Brian closed the door downstairs. All right, so I'm going to fasten this off. Okay. And there you have the beginning of a granny square. I'm going to just cut these ends off. This is just a scrap piece anyway, so I'm not going to weave them in, but I'm going to cut them off really quick just so that I can talk this out with you one more time before I let you go. There's one. Okay. So what you're going to have is, again, you're going to have where when we first started, again, we did this to 4 corners, and then on our second round we had the 4 corners, but then in between we had a chain 2 space, And then now on round 3, we had 2 chain 2 spaces between the corners. And as you do more and more and more rounds, it's going to just increase. Like my placemats I did, they have 11 chain 2 spaces between the corners. But that's it. That's as simple as you know, anything else, like granny square. And it's something to just kind of get your get your hands going. And if you use crochet as more of a meditative thing, like this is really good to just, you know, sit down with some yarn and see where this takes you. And the cool thing is, like these, if you make an Afghan, it's airy enough so it's not as heavy as like a Afghan, let's say, done in single crochet or something like that. So the possibilities are really endless with the granny square. Anyway, I'm gonna go get a drink of water so that I don't keep coughing in your ear slash, well, I guess it's just your ear because you can't see me. Anyway, have a great day. I will be back soon with another tutorial. Until then, happy crocheting, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.